Now we will be actually learning a few more things in Python, and those are some statements that are used with while and for loops in Python. So I should write statements in loops.py. So those statements are break, continue, and pass. Now, what do you mean by these three statements? So I think you should be clear with the first statement from the name itself that it will break something when a condition becomes true or a program reaches a certain point where we want to break it or we don't want the further code to be executed. In that case, we use the break statement. For example, you can see that uh, let me just run a for loop and I will be using a variable I, and in this case I want the numbers to be printed from 0 to 10, but the catch is that due to some reason I want to break my code. Actually, I want the for statement to exit. So what I want is I want to stop the execution of this for loop due to some reason. Maybe I don't want a particular iteration to be actually printed on a terminal. So there might be other cases, but as you are not much familiar with programming, I won't want to disturb you by discussing all those cases because they might hinder your patience in this case. So I just want to print the number uh, by want to print the number I, and if I'm going to print the number I, you will simply see that the code just prints 0 on the terminal and the loop just exits. You can see that the loop exited and only 0 is being printed on the terminal. So why this happened is because Python executes every piece of code line by line, and first it encountered the print I statement and it printed 0 on the terminal. Then it encountered the break statement and it simply made this loop to exit. So this was the simple working of break statement, and we generally don't use break statement openly in our code. By saying openly, I do mean is that we generally use this kind of if block, and then we write some condition like if I is equal to 6, say I want the loop to break. Now what will happen in this case is this loop will start execution from 0 and go to all way through 6. 6 will be printed on the terminal because this print statement is written before if block, and then it will encounter that I was equal to 6 and it will break. So I is equal to 7, that is the value of 7 will not be printed on terminal, and you will be able to see that what I said has now come true. The values of I from 0 to 6 are printed on the terminal, whereas the values greater than 6 are not printed. So if I want the values to be up to 5 only, that is from 0 to 5, I will simply take this piece of code above the print statement and run it, and you will see that it has now printed from 0 to 5. So this was the simple break statement. It simply is used when we want to exit the loop at a particular condition. That is when a particular condition becomes true. So this was all about break statement, and now we will be moving to the next statement, that is continue statement. So continue statement is actually used when we want to skip a iteration. So let me just illustrate you over here. That is what this for loop is saying, that start printing from 0 and then the go up to the number 10, like this. So, but what we want is, in a particular case, we don't want the number, we don't want the for loop to print a particular number. That is, I don't want to print the number 5, but I also don't want the for loop to break. Did you understand me what I am saying? I don't want the for loop to print this particular iteration, that is 5, but at the same time I don't want the for loop to break. That is, I don't want the program to exit the for loop. So to solve this problem, this continue statement was actually engineered by the developers of Python. Let me just illustrate you how it works. So if I want to skip the iteration 5, as I have already said, so I will simply make this equal to 5, then simply this piece of code will not be executed. You can see that 5 is not printed on the terminal. So now we have covered continue statement. We will now be beginning with this pass statement. So this statement pass is actually used whenever we want to tell the interpreter that we are actually not knowing what we have to write inside this if statement's logic, and but there is something that we want to write here in future. So in this case we will be using a pass statement to tell the compiler that we have something to write over here, but please do not give us an error, and so that this code or this piece of code can be executed successfully without any error, and we can test this piece of code with the missing part of logic. In that case, we use the pass statement. You can see that if I try to use this if statement without a pass statement and without any logic written into it, it will give me an error. So you might be wondering that we can simply use a comment also, so that we can remember that we have to use a if statement and write some logic inside it. You are actually correct, but the purpose of comments is quite different. So this is all about pass statement. What will happen is, let me just explain it to you iteration wise. So first the value of I will become 0. It checks this if condition, and if the if condition is successfully executed, then it will simply actually print the value of I, that is 0, moving on to the next value, that is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Then it will encounter that I has actually now become 5, and there is something to be done when the value of I becomes 5. But nothing is written over here, so nothing will be done. That is what I want to say is, the Python interpreter knows that something in future will be done when I will equal to 5, but for now nothing has to be done because the coder has written over here a pass statement which simply tells that I will do this piece of code later in future. So this was simply the pass statement. So I simply assume that by now all of these three statements would be clear to you. So there is a very simple problem for you to solve. That is, Uh, you actually need to, what is I write over there? You actually need to write a code and print this pattern in the terminal. Now, what the pattern is, there are actually stars, but the catch is every new line of stars is actually having odd number of stars. That is, in the first line we'll have a single star, then three stars, then five stars, then seven stars. So we have to print this pattern on terminal, but the catch is we have to use the continue statement. You can do it without continue statement also. That is a different point, but in this case, I want you to do it using continue statement so that you can better understand the implementation of the continue statement. So, how will we be doing it? So, we will be now using while loop for solving the same problem. So, let's do it. So, let us declare a variable I that we will be using in the loop, and let us initialize it with 0. Then we will be starting a while loop, and inside that while loop, since we have to print this number of stars up to a maximum limit of 7, so we will actually be treating this comparison value to be 8, so that the number 7 is covered in this range because it is the last number, integer number, which is less than 8. So, not the last number, it is the greatest number that is an integer and also less than 8. Now, I will be incrementing this value by 1. Then, if the value of this I is actually, I should say the value when I is divided by 2, and that value, that is the remainder when I divided by 2, should be equal to 0, then in that case just continue that iteration, that is, don't execute anything which will fall after this continue is executed, and start from a fresh iteration and print this statement, that is I into this. Now you will see that this code will actually work, and I have printed the same pattern on the terminal. Meanwhile, I have also illustrated you the use of continue statement. So one more thing I want you to know is that please do not do a mistake of putting this line of code behind this continue statement, and the reason is that if you put it after this continue statement in this while loop, then when this condition becomes true, that is, when I is an even number, in that case, it will not execute this piece of code. And if this piece of code is not executed, then you will land into a trap of infinite loop. So if I'm going to run this piece of code, you will see that nothing will be printed on my terminal, and you can see that nothing is printed on this terminal. Meanwhile, there is a computation which is being continuously run on my terminal. That is, while loop is still running in the background, but I am unable to see anything. So these are some cases where these types of code are very dangerous because you might not see anything being printed on the terminal and you might assume that there is nothing running, but in actual there is a while loop running, and the proof is this. You can see that it says keyboard interrupt, and this line officially tells you that something was being continuously run by the Python interpreter, which has now been stopped by the keyboard interrupt, that is Control C. So this was how do we use this break continue statements with while loop. If you want a few more questions, you can go to any AI and ask for a few more questions, or either you can search like pattern printing problems in Python, and you will get a number of patterns that are available online that you can print and test your skills. And this is only a particular type of problem, but there are many other types of problems available online for you to solve. So keep looking for them also. So this was all about for loops, while loops, and break, continue, and pass statements. Now we will be moving to the next part, that is a for loop with an else statement. Many of you might actually try to connect it with do while loops, those who already are familiar with some other programming languages. But let me be clear that for else are not equivalent, or I should say, they are not even close to do while loop in their functioning, and moreover, their outputs are also different. Since there are no do while loops in Python, I actually cannot illustrate you with do while loops because this particular course is restricted to Python only. But we will surely be looking for these for else loops in Python. Let me give you a heading over here. For else loops in Python. So what is the basic syntax of for else loop is? I hope you are already familiar with the syntax of for loop by now. So let me just write it over here. That is for, then here comes the condition, which is most probably I in range and some value inside this range function, then a colon, then here will be the code for this for loop. And one more thing that I want to tell is that if we actually don't enter anything in the range function and try to execute, we will actually get an error. And if there is one more thing, so there might be many a times that you might be able to see this underscore in a few programs used by convention when you don't want to use a variable simply so that the code is actually simple. For example, you might have used a global variable I and you may not want to use or redeclare that variable, or you don't want to use that particular name again, or there might be several reasons for you to not declare anything over here. So in that case, we just simply use an underscore and then provide a range so that the loop works. This was a simple syntax for loop, and now we'll be coming to the for with else. Now we knew that a for loop in this case, as it is over here, will successfully execute, and simply the program will actually exit, or I should say will come down if there are other lines of code. But assume that I am testing a piece of code and I actually don't know if this for loop is running normally or not. So how will I test it? So one way to do is that to simply write a code that will actually print everything, I should say, that will actually print something on every iteration of the for loop. So this will actually be not a good approach many a times when the code is quite huge. So in that case, we use a for loop with else. That is, if this for loop will be executed successfully and the condition will become false, then this else block will be executed. That is, at the last iteration or maybe in between, if there occurs an event where this piece of code, or I should say the piece of the condition becomes false and the loop breaks, eventually this else loop will not be executed. But if the loop is terminated normally and and there are no significant errors that the compiler has found during the execution, then this else block will be executed. And in every other case, this else block will not be executed. So there are many use cases of this for loop with else. So for else is used when we are searching something in a string, or we are finding a particular value, or there is there will be one particular code that I will be illustrating you to, that will be the prime number checking code. In that code, we will be checking if number is prime or not it is not a prime number. And as I have already told you that it actually validates if the for loop successfully executed or not. So it is sometimes used in execution of some validation programs in your coding journey. So this were some simple use cases of for loop with else. Now I will be giving an example of how to use or a for loop with an else. So let's roll it. For I in range 0 to 10, just simply print I, and if this loop is successfully executed, then just please print that loop executed successfully. Please ignore if there are any spelling mistakes in my code. Now you will see that this ran from 0 to 9, and then it simply printed that loop executed successfully. Now, what would have happened if we actually wanted the loop to break? For example, I use the break statement on the very first iteration itself, and you might be wondering that why this piece of code is actually a bit dull in color when compared to this piece of code, because VS Code is telling you that you have placed a break statement even before you have finished writing your entire. So if the code breaks, then this statement will not be executed, and because it will not be executed, it is of no use. So VS Code is simply making it a bit dull. So if I'm going to run this piece of code, let's see what happens. You can simply see that I forced the for loop to break in between before it could actually complete, and since for loop did not execute itself entirely and successfully, this else statement was never executed. As you can see that if I'm going to run this piece of code again, you will see that nothing is there on my terminal. So this was a simple case where we actually use the for loop with else statements. Now, as I have told you the for loop with else statement, we will be using for loop with else when we will be covering the data types in Python. That is, we will be covering lists, tests, and tuples and others. We will be using it over there. For now, I just want you to know that a for loop with else exists in Python. So we have now almost covered everything that a programmer who is just starting his programming journey must know. In our previous lectures, we have already learned about variables, data types. Those are integer, float, complex, strings, and others like Boolean values in Python. But and then we have also seen loops in Python. Those are for loops and while loops. Also, we have seen what different types of operators in Python. And now we have reached the point where we will be starting with data structures in Python. You may call them data structures, or either you can call them collections. And collections are mainly of four type in Python, and those are lists. Let me just write it down over here. Those are lists. Then comes tuples. Then come dictionaries, or I should say sets, and then come dictionaries. So these are the four main, you can say, structures, data structures or collections in Python. Although the best word to use here will be collection. Although although the best word that I should use here is collection. So these are the main four types of collections in Python. We will be seeing each of them in detail, and we will also be discussing what actually is the, or we will also be discussing why do we need these four different types of collections, and what are the methods by which we can actually modify the data inside these collections if we can, or if they are not mutable, that is, they cannot be modified at all. So we will actually be looking at all of these four data structures or collections in Python, and we will first of all be beginning with lists. So I have already made a file for lists, but before we do move ahead, have you ever wondered why do we even need these collections in Python? So this is actually a very good question, that why do we need this? So the answer is quite simple, and let me just explain the reason to you by first starting with an example. So let us assume that a teacher wants to store a data of 10 students, and let that data be marks of 10 students. So will he be creating a variable each time for each student? So you might say that yes, this is possible and he can do that. Okay, if you say that, what about the case of 100 students? Will he still be creating a variable each time? Now, some of you might say that yes, he can either copy paste and then modify. So, what if I say that you can do the same task that you were doing initially by creating n number of variables in a much simpler way and saving a lot of time? So, you might be wondering how to do it. So, here comes where we need collections. So, come back to the example. Come back to the example of students, which I was actually saying that a teacher will need to create n number of variables. So instead of making n number of variables each time, what he can do is he can simply make a list. Yes, you heard me right. he can simply make a list of those students and store their marks as integers inside that list. So now we will be creating a list that will be named as marks, and now we will store marks of different students inside this list. For example, somebody have got 100 marks, some got 90, somebody got 34, and some got 78. So in this list, we have stored marks of 4 students, and similarly, we can store marks of any number of students. For example, let me just copy these marks and I will paste them over and over again so that each time I don't have to. Now you can see that these many numbers can be stored inside a single variable using the collection, that is list. I hope you would be familiar about the word collection. Collection means something that is actually put together and kept at a single place. So we call that whole pile of things as a collection. So this is the syntax for, I should say, a one from many syntaxes for creating a list. So you might be saying that are there others too? So yes, there are others too. Like you can, instead of creating a list simply like this, you can actually create a list like this. This is now an empty list, and each time you want to add a new, I should say, item to the list, you can actually use some built-in method for lists. Now we will actually be coming to built-in methods for the class list. Yes, you heard me right. List is actually a class in Python. You can see over here that list is actually a class in Python, and you can see VS Code suggests me over here that it is a mutable sequence. So it means that every item in this list can actually be modified if the item is actually modifiable. So what do I mean by this? That if the actual item is modifiable, that is, this data type, that is integer, is actually, you can modify it. But in other cases like a string is not mutable, so you cannot modify the original string. Although you might be wondering that we have actually seen various n number of ways that we implemented on string. So my dear friend, those were some methods that are predefined in Python, but Python itself says that a string once created is immutable. That is, you cannot modify what the string actually is. Now, this might be a bit confusing to you, but I would want you to research on this topic a bit by yourself. And now, coming back to the list class, so you can see that it is a mutable value. So I already explained you that it means that anything inside list, if it is modifiable, it can be modified. And the second point, it says that if no argument is actually given, you can see that if no argument is actually given, what do you mean by this line? It means that if nothing inside this square braces or inside this parenthesis is provided to this list, then by default it creates a new empty list. So this was all it is saying to be it is saying about the class list. And the next line says that and the next line says that the argument must be an iterable if specified. So I want you to discover more about this line. You will be able to find many details online. If you want, you can take a screenshot of this on the screen, and you can just go to any website or any artificial intelligence so that you may get more information regarding the same. Now, I hope you would have taken the screenshot if you needed it. Now we can move towards the second point in collection, that is tuples. So I think it will be better for us to cover tuple in a entire new lecture instead of using, or I should say instead of explaining the term tuple now. It will be better for me and you to understand it in the next, another complete different lecture. So this was all basic information that one should know regarding lists in Python. And as you also know what is an empty list, you also know how to create a list of integers. Now let me tell you that a list can actually contain random data types in it. Yes, you heard me right. Python allows to enter random data type in list. So by saying random, I do not mean that anything random that you may think of you would be able to put inside the list. But by saying random, I mean that you can actually put different data types in the same list. Yes, you have heard me right. Unlike other programming languages like C and C++, where you actually need to define the array that which data type it will be storing. In Python, you don't actually need to do so. You can simply store any kind of data type. That is, you can store a string, you can store integer, you can store a real number, and you can also store a complex number like 5j plus 34.32323. Yes, this is also a perfectly valid list in Python. And if I'm going to print this list random, you will see that Python did not give me any kind of error, and the list has been successfully printed on my terminal. Now you know that how to create a list. You also know that list can contain a mixed number of data types into it, and you also know how to print the list as a whole. We will be moving on to the next topic in the category list, where I will tell you how to print, or yes, it will be better, how to print the item inside the list one by one. So yes, you can print items inside list one by one, and for this you can use any of the loops. You can use for loops and while loops, but for simplicity we will actually be using for loop. So how to do it using for loop? Let's take a look at it. So I would say for a mark in marks, I want to print the mark. It will read it like this. In marks list that is already created over here, you can see it will look for the first iteration itself and then store the value of this iteration into this variable that is mark. It will store the value of this iteration into this variable mark and print it on my terminal when I will execute this for loop. You can see that this entire list has been printed on my terminal. Let me just shorten the list so that you can actually take a look at it in a more better way. Yes, you can see that all these four numbers have been printed on my terminal, and this is another way how you can print each and every item in the list individually. So now that we have covered how to print each and every item in the list using for loops, we will now be covering how indexing works in list. So indexing works same as it work in the strings. Yes, you heard me right. Indexing works the same way as it works in strings. That is, the number which appears first in the list will be assigned an index of 0, and the numbers those follow the first number will be assigned a number in the increasing order in which each index increases by 1, and the last value, that is n, will actually have an index of n minus 1 because the indexing starts from 0 in Python. And in the same way, if we will be starting the indexing from, I say, from the last item in the list, the indexing would go the all way to minus n, starting from the negative integer, that is minus 1. So this is how indexing works in list, and it is almost the same way it worked in strings. And I should say it is absolutely the same way it works in strings. There is no difference in how indexing works. How can we access each and every item of list? So to do this, the syntax is you first have to type the name of the list and then use square braces. Inside this square braces, you can, I should go this way. That is, inside this square braces, now will be coming, how can you actually access the value at a particular index in a list, or either you want a section from a list. By section, I mean a part from a list. Yes. So the syntax is absolutely same as we had the syntax in strings. There is no difference in syntax over here. That is, you can actually assign a value of any iteration in the string to another variable and use it. That is, if I want to give the value of the first iteration in marks, that is 100, to this variable mark, I will simply use the index for assigning the value, and when I'm going to print this mark, you will see that, I'm sorry, yeah, you will see that this mark 10 will be printed on the terminal. As you can see that it is printed successfully. So when I'm going to print the mark 0 in the terminal, you will be able to see that the mark 100 appearing on my screen. You can see that mark 100 has appeared on my screen. Now you might be wondering that, like, we used to access part of string using these two semicolons and then specifying here the very first index to start from, then specifying the n plus 1th index where nth index is the last index which we will be able to access through this method, and then specifying that step over here. Is that the same way we will be using in the list to access a part of list? So the answer is obviously yes. Yes, we will be using the same method, or the same approach, a better word. we will be using the same approach to access parts of list, and we can assign the part of list to another variable, and that another variable will become of the same data type that this data type was initially of. Yes, you are hearing right. I'm using the word data type, and data type is actually also a correct word for list, tuple, dictionary, and sets. Yes, you heard me right. It is a correct word. And if you want to know how data type, data structure, and collections, all these words can be used for these four terms, you can actually go to any website or any artificial intelligence website and just ask it that question, and you will get a reply. So let me just illustrate you by slicing out a part from this list. And but before, let me make it a bit more larger so that we can use the stepping also. So I want to access the indices from this very first iteration to the second last iteration. That is, I want it from the 0th index to the fifth or fifth index. So I will type out this, the number 6, so that I can access this index, and I want to skip the every second value the slicing will encounter. So I will use a step value of 2, and now according to this way, so now according to this approach, this value and this value should be skipped, and on the terminal we should see 100 and 70 under 100 and then 34, and then we should see 45. These three numbers should appear on the terminal. So let us print the marks. 2, you can see that those three numbers, that is 100, 34, and 45, have appeared on the terminal. So I won't explain it again since I have already done it in the previous lecture. So now we actually do know how we can access a single element from a string, and we do know that how we can actually access a particular value at a particular index from the list. I'm sorry if I had earlier used the word string instead of list in this particular lecture. So we have now completed uh we have completed a handsome amount of part regarding list, and this was how we could actually access a particular index or apart from list. So as we have now covered how we can actually access a particular part of a string, now we will be covering how we can actually modify a item at an index in a list. So for this purpose, we will be using the same list, that is marks, and so to access any particular index at marks and to modify it, we just need to use marks. Then we will enter the index that we want to modify the value at, and simply we will be assigning the index that we want to modify, and then we will enter a new value by simply just assigning this index in this list a new value. So suppose I want to modify the marks of first student, and now I want to reduce his marks to 98 instead of 100. So I will simply do it by this approach. So now when we are going to execute this print statement, we will see that this 100 has been changed to 98. Yes, you can see over here that 100, which was initially there in the first very index in this marks list, has now changed its value to 98. I should not say 100 had changed the value. Instead, we have changed the value at first index and we made it 98. Now we have also seen how we can modify any value at a particular index in the list. We will now be taking a look at some methods in the list. So now we will be covering the first method under strings, and that method is sort. I hope it will be clear by the name itself that what sort will do. It will simply arrange the items inside the list in a manner in which the first index will occupy the smallest number in the list, and then the last index will occupy the largest number in the list. Meanwhile, the numbers in between will also be arranged in a pattern of ascending order. So let us use the same list over here so that you get a better understanding. I will be commenting out the code that I have written initially, and now we will sort this list. So if I'm going to use marks dot sort and I'm going to print it, so let us do something. Let us assign this marks to a sorted marks list, and let us make a, so what we have done is we have actually created a new variable that is sorted marks, and we have actually given it the sorted list that is marks sort in a sorted manner, and now we're going to print this list sorted dot marks, and let us see what happens. See, it returns none, and why it returns none, that we will cover after a few seconds. But for now, to tell you that this marks dot sort actually works, let me just sort it again and comment this line out. It again returns me a value none, and the reason behind this is because this marks dot sort method actually returns none. Yes, it returns none. Why it returns none? Because the in class lists where they have defined this method sort, they have made the return type to be none. I know because I have not taught you, oops, you might not be able to get what do I mean by this return type, but for now you can either skip this part or you can simply just remember it for now, and you will simply understand it what I meant when I will be teaching you the concept in OOPS. But now to get the original list, we will have to do it like this. You can see that this list is now in a sorted manner and in the order that is ascending order. So to sort a list in ascending order, we use this method. Now, what if I had to sort a list in descending order? And that is your homework. So you will have to check how we can sort a list in descending order. So we have now covered the sort method, which was the first method that we have covered in string in list. Now we will be covering the second method, and that method is clear method. Clear method. So this method will clear the entire list. That is, if I clear the list, then there will be no items assigned to that list, and the list will become eventually empty like this. Uh, Let me just reuse the old list. This is the old list, and if I do it like this, marks dot clear, and then I run it, and if I'm going to print the marks, then see, you can see that it shows the list is empty, and the reason is because I have cleared the list. So now we have come to the next method, that is pop method. So pop method will actually remove the last item in the list. So how this method works is quite similar to this clear method. So if I say marks dot pop, and if I print the marks again, you will see that the number 89 has been removed from the list, which was initially present at the last index in this list. So this is how pop method works. And if you want to check what this pop method returns, then you can simply use the same method. That is, you can assign it any variable and try to print what the variable contains, and if the variable contains none, then it means this pop method does not return anything. But in this case, it will return this last value, because once you execute the pop method, after that it will store the, or I should say, it will return the value which we have decided to remove. So if I'm going to run this, you can see that it returned me 89, which we have removed. And if you don't understand it like this, we will be printing the value of, or we will be printing the mass list too, and under that we will be printing the list, or I should say the variable a2. And so you can now see that the entire list marks is printed on the terminal except the number 89, which has been popped out by this method. And since this method returns the number which it already popped out, so here is the number which we printed, that is the popped out number, using the variable a. You can also remove item at a particular index from this list by just mentioning the index value of that item in the list. For example, I want to remove 34, which is at an index of 2, and if I'm going to run this code, you will see that 34 has been successfully removed from the list, and it is printed in the second line too, because we printed the value of a, which stored the popped element. So I hope now it will be clear to you how the pop method works in Python. Now we will be moving ahead, and we will be covering the next method, that is copy method. So how can we copy a list? If we want to make a copy of the list that we have, we can simply use the copy method, this method, to create a copy of the list. So to do this, you just have to create another list, or you need to create another variable. So I will create another list, that is copied list, and I will assign it the value of marks, and I will then be using the copy method on marks so that a copy of marks is generated, and I can simply print the copied list, and you can see that this copied list has been successfully printed on my terminal.